Welcome to another edition of the Hobby Hour. My name is Jim Granado. I'm Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs. And in honor of Women's History Month, author and founder of the Ann Richards Legacy Project, Margaret Justus, is joining me on today's show to discuss Ann Richards' trailblazing career in Texas politics. Women's History Month highlights generations of women pioneers in our communities, and I look forward to celebrating a political icon and timeless spirit of hope in the Lone Star State, former Governor Ann Richards. Now, about our speaker, Margaret Justus has an extensive career in Texas politics, having served on communications as a communications lead for 10 political campaigns in the state, including working with former Texas Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby, our school's namesake. Also to pass a Texas constitutional amendment in 2009 in support of Tier 1 research universities in Texas, and also on Bill Clinton's 1996 reelection bid. So there's an extensive record there, and we could discuss that, but the show goes 6 hours long. So in addition, as a former broadcast journalist, Margaret Justus has worked as a reporter, producer, anchor, and assignments editor. Unbelievable. It goes on. More recently, Margaret Justus founded the Ann Richards Legacy Project in 2021, a nonprofit that displayed 300 street banners of Ann Richards in major Texas cities across the state. The banners honored the 30th anniversary of the inauguration of Governor Ann Richards and led to the publication of the book, The One and Only, Wit and Wisdom from Texas Governor Ann Richards. The One and Only features a collection of photographs alongside powerful quotes from the life of Ann Richards, capturing the unique singularity of the last Democratic governor in Texas. Margaret Justus, who served as Ann Richards' deputy press secretary from 1989 to 1994, envisioned a book tracing Ann Richards' life from a top high school debater to being elected the first woman Travis County Commissioner and later Texas governor in her own right. During our conversation, Margaret Justus will take us back in time to celebrate the First Lady of Texas politics. Welcome, Margaret Justus.
Oh, thank you so much, Dean Granado. Quite an honor. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
So, before we get into this topic, let's talk about you. You're from Kansas originally, right?
Yes, I am. Rock Chalk Jayhawk. They're down, of course, in that tournament. A little disappointed in that Texas score the other day, but I think we're going to pull it off. Let's hope.
Well, my favorite running back is Gale Sayers, who is called the Kansas Comet. So,
yeah. One of mine too. Gail Sayers, great. Yeah. So I went to the University of Kansas, grew up in Kansas City area, studied journalism. In those days, they called it broadcast news emphasis. And I had, interest in broadcast news, went to work out of undergraduate for the Topeka station, where I was early morning anchor during cut-ins, which was me, myself, and I producing that. It was such a tiny station. And then when from Des Moines, Iowa, where I got to cover some of the Iowa caucuses as a 22-year-old, which I can't believe. I interviewed Jerry Ferraro when she was running with Walter Mondale. It's so funny to hear the Iowa caucuses, the coverage right now. We're 10 months out. We're hearing about Iowa caucuses today. And then back to Kansas City, where I had an internship in college. I worked at the CBS affiliate there. And then moved to Houston. My husband at the time had a great job, and we couldn't turn that down. So didn't know a soul, walked into that town and worked in radio news, covering just about everything in a small radio station, and learned the town pretty quickly, covered, city government, county courts, covered the Houston Oilers, which I can't believe they sent us to everything. And then also from Houston, I got to work as a assignments editor at KPRC, which was a great opportunity. That was managing, close to, 30 or 40 reporters and photographers, dispatching them all over that town, which was growing rapidly in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And then including, we had to dispatch helicopters to explosions in the ship channel, so it was a big job. And then we got transferred. My husband got transferred to Austin, and again, didn't know a soul in Austin. Didn't really want to continue TV news. I was interested in other things, and sort of took my time exploring that. And I walked in as a volunteer in Ann's campaign in 1989 when she was running for governor. At the time, she'd just given the 88 convention speech, and I knew nobody there except one person knew her daughter, and they said, this person has some, background in journalism. You might want to see if she's worth anything to hire. And so within a month, they hired me, put me in the press office.
Wow.
Yeah. That was, it was just, not everybody does that way, but, it was just a great opportunity because I tell kids this too. It's like young people explore through internships and volunteer because you just don't know where it's going to lead. And volunteering just gives you experience and an opportunity to put it on a resume, but just gives you an idea of whether you're not going to like a position or a job. And we may end up just falling in love. And I did. Politics was something I was interested in grade school and high school. I volunteered on campaigns. So anyway, so that was really how I got started in politics, working at Ann's campaign in '89. So when she ran against Governor Mark White in the primary, as well as Attorney General Maddox. That was a narrow defeat, and then went on to beat Clayton Williams in the 1990 race, who was also was a very come from behind victory, major come from behind victory.
Wow. So you became deputy press secretary.
Yes.
And for our students out there, what's that like? I mean, the day in the life.
Well, certainly in the governor's race back then, she was hugely popular because of just who she was. Ann was just a lot of fun for reporters to cover because she was funny and she could always give a great one-liner, which is, of course, part of the book and part of the banners. But so we had interest not just from Texas reporters who covered the Capitol, but there was international interest from the BBC to the Australian press, the Japanese television. So part of my job as a deputy was to keep track of requests for interviews. It wasn't like we had to go out and get press. I mean, I had to say that's something we didn't really have to generate, particularly in the 90 race, because there was so much attention. She was just rare. It wasn't back in those days, 32 years ago, not many women were running for office, let alone winning. And particularly in Texas, which was known as sort of a male-dominated macho state. And so for her to run and win was a huge story. So that was part of the job, was to keeping track of reporters who needed to talk to her, preparing the candidate for interviews, anticipating what they're going to ask, and then being able to do damage control when the opponents launched whatever they had to launch that day, and get back up the next day and do it all over again.
So what was it about her inspired so many people?
Ann would say to people that she was sort of a two-headed cow, which is kind of a weird way to describe it, but she was rare. But I think it was her personality, her dynamic personality, and her spirit and her love of all humans. She was just a great humanitarian, and she just had a great sense of humor, and she made people feel at ease regardless. And regardless of your politics, I think most folks loved Ann Richards and knew that they watched her that day on Larry King or heard her speech, they were going to learn something about what she was trying to do, which was reform government. And she wasn't afraid to do that. Ann pushed for all kinds of reforms, and maybe that was perhaps her downfall, including, prison reform. She established the first substance abuse program for TDC inmates. That took a lot of guts. She established an ethics commission and appointed Barbara Jordan as her ethics advisor. And she also was particularly avid about fighting gun violence, something that back then wasn't even heard of. She vetoed the legislation that was a concealed to carry law. And some folks think, that was probably a little gutsy and probably was part of her downfall in terms of her reelection, but she just wasn't afraid to do that. And I think people respected that about her courage to lead and really just do the right thing.
Prior to being elected, the first one to serve as county commissioner in Travis County, Ann Richards taught social studies and history at a junior high school in Austin. Why did she enter Texas politics? And she was basically, it sounds like, homemaker.
Yeah, well, she did teach school. And in fact, one of the quotes on the banner and in the book is teaching was the hardest job I ever had, including being governor. And she believed that, and she got a lot of teacher support because of that. But before that, she was actually involved in politics. I mean, she started getting involved in politics as a young woman, and interested in public service. She was a girls' state attendee, if you know what that is, which is a mock legislative program for young women. And there's a boys' state one as well. I encourage young people to look into that because it's exposure to what it means to serve. And then she went on to represent Texas at Girls Nation in Washington, D.C. And then from there, she married her husband at the time, David Richards, who was a noted civil rights attorney. And so they were involved in local politics in Dallas when they first settled there, and then when they moved to Austin. And then Ann got involved in helping other women get elected, including Wilhelmina Delco here in Austin, as well as Sarah Weddington, who ran for state rep, both of them. And then, Ann, the timing was right when she ran for county commissioner. It was actually, if you read her memoir, folks approached her husband, Dave, to run for county commissioner because the opening was there. And then he said he didn't want to do it. And then they turned to Ann and said, "How about you?" And so she did. And she really worked a very effective campaign on that. And then timing was right when she ran for state treasurer, which of course is an office that doesn't exist anymore, which is what Senator Hutchinson actually got elected to. There was the former office holder there was indicted, I believe, for misuse of campaign funds. And, you got to strike while the iron's hot. So she ran for state treasurer at the time, and then turned that state agency around with the help of Governor Hobby and Lieutenant Governor Bullock, who was a comptroller at the time, and then had a great record to run on as governor. And then, of course, the 88 convention speech happened, and that turned her whole world upside down in terms of exposure. And that's when I talk about, reporter interest in Governor Richards was vast. And we had to, manage and decide, just how much time we could spend talking, doing interviews, because we, again, there was an unlimited number of folks who wanted to talk to her.
So in terms of the progression, she's state treasurer the time she gives the speech at the 1980 Democratic National Convention, correct?
Yeah.
Had she announced to be governor, she's running for governor at that time, or did she do it after the speech?
After the speech.
Okay.
And it was the summer of '89, I think it was summer she announced. And of course, that was a hilarious speech that got so much attention. Beautifully written by her, along with her speechwriter, Suzanne Coleman, and a whole cadre of friends who were sending it back and forth to each other. And if you read her memoir, it's pretty funny. I think they actually lose the text itself in somebody's computer. To Atlanta and lost the text and had to start all over again. But had some great one-liners, including, Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in high heels, as we all know. And we like to, that's of course one of the quotes in the book, but we also make it clear that it wasn't something that she came up with uniquely. It's someone heard it on an airplane, I think, at the time, and they just wrote it down and used it. But it was a great line because she could deliver it better just than anybody. And then the other line, of course, was her poking fun of the sitting president who was running for re-election. That was George Herbert Walker Bush, President Bush, who was being poked fun of about his inability to identify with average folks. And I think her line was, "Poor George, he can't help it. He was born with a silver foot in his mouth." And I think a couple of things I heard later and read later, I think it was Ross Ramsey who said that might have made George W. Bush sort of angry and thought about at that time to run against her when she was going to run for re-election. Of course, he did. But President Bush and Barbara Bush thought that was a funny line, and they even had a pin made for Governor Richards, a silver foot pin, and send it to her, and she would wear it when they would come visit at any time. So they thought it was a funny line, I think. Now that line is not in the book, and probably because I chose not to put sort of partisan quotes in the book. I really wanted to have them sort of have more lasting impact. So a lot of the quotes are nonpartisan and representing
Right.
her.
Do you recall why how she got the invite to be the keynote speaker? Obviously, she's a Texan, and they're trying to do something to secure Texas for the Democrats, right? And of course, her ability to deliver. I mean, there are very few people that have that kind of wit. I mean, it just stands out. So, was she recruited for it, or I mean, obviously other candidates at the time, but to do that, but they chose her.
I'm sure there was a short list, like there always is when you come up with, keynote address list for a DNC or RNC speech. And as I recall, just reading in her book, she had given so many funny speeches around Texas and just great speeches, inspiring women to run for office. Even as county commissioner, she was invited to give speeches in East Texas, South Texas, all the major cities. And so she'd had this track record, of course, of great speeches. And so someone had sent copies of her speeches and video to the head of the DNC that year, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but it'll come back. But and they invited her, and there was a lot of detail in her memoir where she talks about the day that she was invited and how she was just blown away. She couldn't believe it, and her whole world changed. It really did.
Oh yeah, I mean, she was talked about everywhere after that because I was, where was I? I mean, definitely not in Texas at the time.
Michigan.
Probably, exactly. Yeah. Either that or North Carolina. But when I saw that speech, I said, holy cow, this is something, this is a force of nature. And then you couldn't help but every once in a while she'd pop up somewhere and you just have to listen because you knew you get informed, but also you get a laugh once in a while, which is a deadly combination if you're a public figure.
Exactly. It was definitely a secret weapon for her to use her wit.
So if you spend time in downtown Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio or Houston in 2021, you likely saw dozens of banners with photos of Ann Richards, along with many of her most memorable quotes on display marking the 30th anniversary of the late governor's inauguration. Now, what aspects of this collaborative public and art project better reveal the legendary larger-than-life figure than a documentary biography on bookshelves, which is what you've done. Now, let me add something else here about this part. I culturally, she's a very important figure, and we know that. I mean, I can't think of many governors that have had a Broadway play done about them. I mean, we have a book. I mean, we have a story that's fiction about Huey Long,
right?
And of course, that's not a happy story. No, and I was lucky enough to be able. I didn't see the play that Holland Taylor did, but I did see it in Houston at the Alley Theater. And what I remember about it was the humor is everywhere, and so it's hysterical. But also, she was involved with her family so much in the play. But that aside, it's just rare that you see that. I mean, that just shows the cultural impact. But back to this idea about the documentary biography you've worked on. Tell us about this.
So the banners really did grow out of the pandemic. So it was the 30th anniversary of her inauguration. We'd had an all staff Zoom meeting just because, and friends and staff members, and we couldn't get together, no one could gather. And I had just moved back from Houston to Austin and I think I was at a gift shop in Austin, the ATX gift shop, Austin gift shop. And they had some of the Anne candles there that we've seen in their iconic Saint candles, and like they have a Willie Nelson one. There's all the other stars, and Anne is of course one of them because she's an icon. I bought a few. Walked up to the cash register and looked at the young lady behind the cash register and said, Blake, do you know who this is? And I asked her, I can't. She goes, oh yeah, she's one of the Golden Girls. And I said, okay, it's time to get to work. And so that's when we really couldn't get together, like I say. And I was working with the Downtown Austin Alliance at the time on a project, and they said, Margaret, what about some just straight, beautiful, vinyl banners all along Congress Avenue from the Ann Richards Bridge, which, by the way, is named after her. The bridge, if you ever go, is known as housing the largest urban bat colony in the world, by the way, all the way up to the Capitol. And so that's what we did. We raised a few dollars to get those designed and printed. And they were a series of 12 quotes and 12 photos of her throughout her lifetime. And it was a public art project, really. And it was just a way to spruce up downtown and a way to celebrate 30th anniversary. And that's when I started the Ann Richards Legacy Project with the hope of doing something down the road more permanent in terms of a public tribute to her in Austin. But at the same time, one of our contributors to the banner project, Lynn Dobson and her husband, major philanthropists based here in Austin, they loved the banners. And they said, Margaret, we don't want to stop at the banners. We want to do a book. We want to see those quotes, and because there's so many more quotes of hers and so many great photos. Let's work on quotes and photos together. And that's what we did in most of 2022. And I'll show you the book. So the book it's not very big. And I know that Isaiah's got a picture of it, but and this is not a deep, I tell people it's quotes and photos, not a deep cerebral dive. This is really a celebration of who Anne was, but it's also, if you look, into it, you'll see there's a lovely foreword by award-winning author Sarah Bird, who captures Anne's essence in her foreword, and then Mary Beth Rogers, who wrote the afterword, who was, of course, Anne's campaign manager 2 times and a political historian. But also I pushed for a detailed timeline of her life in the book. And so you can go see, starting from grade school to the time of her passing, all of her accomplishments, political accomplishments. And I do want people to just get a good look at that, because that shows you, what she was involved in from the beginning. And it's kind of a nice primer for young people, young readers. And of course, I make sure that people know that Anne's #1 living legacy is the Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders, which is what she developed in her last years of her life right here in Austin, South Austin. And it's a fabulous all-girls public school, and has just devoted to leadership, STEM education, and is doing great things for so many young women in Texas. And that's really exciting. But again, when I heard that young woman say the treasurer that that was confusing her with Golden Girl, I thought we got to do something. That's what happened. So the book grew out of the banners, and I was delighted, and we spent a lot of time on that. And the pandemic made that challenging too. And I can tell you some of those stories as well. So
let's talk more about the book. So you said already that this project you want to do something more permanent. I assume that meant the book, right?
Well, actually, the book was outgrowth of the banners. Something more permanent is I'm hoping, and that's what the next thing is the Ann Richards Legacy Project is trying to focus on, is a public art tribute based here in Austin. Anne loved contemporary art, and so what we envision is a public contemporary art piece that has a digital teaching element to it. So you actually get to see her and understand really who she was and what she represented. So that's what I'm working on with some folks now, is get a location decided and money raised to get that developed. But the book is sort of as an interim to passage, to the permanent art exhibit, and we're just delighted that it happened.
And the book, though, is basically your idea, correct? That was something you wanted to do.
Well, I did want to do, but it was actually Lynn Dobson and Greg Woodwardge who said, we're going to make it happen. And Greg has an old newspaper man who could write headlines like crazy. And he came up with the title, which is great. The one and only, ANN only, Wit and Wisdom for Texas Governor Ann Richards. And then Lynn has excellent photo editing skills. She's a former photographer, news journalist photographer. And so we were just, it's a great time, and we all collaborated together. A.V. Bonar, who was one of Ann's, her chief photographer during the campaign, she got involved towards the end and helped us with the editing. And of course, we had so much help from the Dolph Briscoe Center for American Studies, which is where Anne's papers are housed. And first they were like, Margaret, we can't really help you because it's the pandemic. And I said, I gotta get in there and see photos. And they were like, well, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so we can, I was like, well, can you just leave a box of photos out on the curb and I'll come look at them, And eventually they assigned me some young staffers who would just on Zoom. And then we went through photos, holding up photos one after the other, showing us options. And so we got some rare photos in the book because the Dolph Briscoe, as well as the Austin History Center, has a good collection of photos of hers. And of course, there's a ton of photos of her online, and some of them we used, but we made sure that all the photographers were paid for, and we, bought the rights to them, including the one that Annie Leibovitz took of her, which is a great one, and that's the also back this one of her that she shot for Vanity Fair, and some other great iconic photos. And when you say, Holland Taylor's play, that it just doesn't happen. Like you say, it doesn't happen every day that someone is featured in such a successful project. I mean, she did that play all over the country, including the Kennedy Center, and was nominated a Tony, received a Tony nomination. And Holland, I think she finally did was this time last year? I think she did the last performance of that in Pasadena, California. And it was a great way to honor her and capture her humanity and her love for her children. As you mentioned, they mentioned her kids, and because, she was what she was, which was a grandmother and a mother, and very much involved in her kids' lives and loved them dearly, and would, we'd take time out, like I was telling you on the way earlier, that to shop for them. If we had any moment on the way from Austin to San Antonio, she'd stop at the San Marcos outlets and, call up one of the kids and say, Cecile, I'm pretty sure you need a set of sheets and some pillows. So I'm going to go pick those up. What else do you need? I could those kind of things. Because that's really who she was. I mean, she was passing public policy and at the same time doing her best to be a devoted mom and grandmother.
You think of the quote about Ginger Rogers dance backwards in high heels. I think of that right now, because she's the governor of the state, and she's doing mom and grandma stuff at the same time, and it's like, talk about multitasking.
Yeah, she's a queen of multitasking, and as often folks would like to say, queen of offering unsolicited advice as your mother. She would be your standard mother and just say, wait a second, you're going to go do what? I think you should be doing this. I remember recently we did a book event at the downtown Austin Library, and Lucy Johnson, President Johnson's daughter, and Mrs. Johnson's daughter was there, and she was like, I got an Anne story. And that's the other thing, when we go around the state and give talks on the book, and inevitably people just stand up and give their Anne story, and how they related to her. And Lucy was like, I was at the gym and there was Anne, and this was after she was governor, and she gave me a lecture about, get off that treadmill and get on that weight bearing exercise, because you have got, she was worried about her getting osteoporosis. So she would give a lecture about things like that. And then Lucy would say, and then she told me someone's got to get Liz Carpenter into an assisted living program. So she would just say things like randomly that, and Lucy just loved her, and so did Lady Bird, and so those are great stories.
So, let's go back to the book a little bit. So you've got the photo, you're working all this, but you've got according with a timeline. So how did you do that? Did you go through her calendars and interview her family? I mean, there had to be, because that guides the photos, right? You had to come up with a very structured timeline. And so how did you do it? So
the timeline is structured. The photos are not, they're not chronological. So when you go through the book, you'll see photos of her late in life or early in life. So they're sort of sporadic. And of course, you want folks to know that there's a ribbon marker in the books, which is kind of fun to have. So of your favorite quote, just so, in fact, here it is. It's white, if you can see that. Oh, There it is.
Yes.
You always put your favorite, if you lay it on a coffee table, you can just mark it with your favorite room.
Right.
Then in terms of the timeline, we had references. Again, Doc Briscoe Center was really helpful. The congressional record we used to make sure we had the timeline right. Mary Beth Rogers' brain, which was really helpful, who helped institute all those policies. She was very, very helpful. We went back and forth with several edits with Mary Beth. Bill Cryer, who was my boss, her press secretary, her number one press secretary, he was extremely helpful. Her kids were very helpful. They offered old photos, and Ellen particularly gave us some great photos that really weren't seen by many people. And then, folks who just knew her, we managed to reach out, and close friends of hers who had rare photos. She never took a bad picture. This is the other thing about Anne. I mean, she just always looked great. And so we had tons of things that, didn't make the cut, and wish they had. But in fact, one of them I regret is there was a great picture of her and Governor Hobby. So I'll tell them we'll do that in the second book about Anne. When Governor Hobby's in that photo with her.
Yeah. Yeah, they were very close.
Yeah.
So thinking about your thoughts about, we already mentioned a few, but there's a couple things I want to ask you now. There's 2 or 3 favorite quotes that you have. Do you have, I mean, you've talked a few. Are there others you can think of that are just really zingers?
There's a lot of zingers. The one about hair. She joke about, men who, a lot of men make fun of my hair, and they're folks who don't have any, so that was always one. And then, but then the funny, less funny, but important ones I always go back to is, and this is from her inauguration speech, and that was, "Life isn't fair, but government absolutely must be." And that's really what she believed. Another one was, "I'd like them to remember me as someone who opened up government to everyone." And what people, I want to point out, because I want folks to know her number one accomplishment was really her impact of appointments. As governor of Texas, as you know, that is the governor's number one job,
Right,
is to
right.
appoint to boards and commissions. And that's why people will say, well, really, lieutenant governors are actually more powerful because they have more impact on legislation. But the governor has influence on who executes and who's at the top of these boards and commissions. And so out of the 3,000 appointments Anne made, 46%, this is 32 years ago, almost 33 years ago, 46% were female, 15% were Black, 20% were Hispanic, 2% were Asian Americans. And, that just hasn't happened since. And in terms of Texas government, she really believed that for government for democracy really to be healthy, government needed to look like the folks they represent, and a government they could trust. And she really expected her staff to work as hard as she did to deliver that. And I think when you go back and look at her record on appointments, you will see that is the number one thing that really did allow. And she said, let folks be represented of all stripes. And I like to say, on the day of inauguration, you looked around on that January day, it was really a tapestry of Texans. There were so many Texans of all different stripes, including Republicans and independents, folks who just crossed the line for her in 1990. And if you go back and look at the numbers, she came from behind in 1990 by like 22, 23 points, and closed the gap within the last week. A lot of it had to do with some gifts that her opponent gave her, and that was Clayton Williams's gaffes. That one of my jobs was to keep track of those gaffes. And
can I interrupt you for that? Because I remember, I guess we should, this is supposed to be a G-rated interview. So, but he did say something about women and rape, I believe. Isn't that right? I mean, which was just.
Yeah. I mean, again, that was a gift from our standpoint. I mean, he was out in West Texas with a bunch of reporters, Capitol Press reporters, all of who I knew because I'd worked with them on the campaign, and I was fielding calls in the press office that evening. And it was actually a woman reporter who called first. It was Nancy Holland from the Channel 11 station in Houston. And she says, Governor Richards have a comment about this joke that Clayton Williams made. Of course, remember, this was in the primary. She wasn't running against him. He was running against other Republicans. I think it was Kent Hance and a couple other people. But so the joke was, they were having bad weather out there. It was raining. And he goes, yeah, bad weather's like rape. You might as well sit back and enjoy it. And, I guess there was discussion amongst the reporters saying, wait, is that on the record? Not on the record? And, a couple of reporters said, that's on the record. And so they were calling Ann for response. And I remember it was a Saturday night, and I thought, we're not going to say anything today, but we're going to say something on Monday, because it was an opportunity of a lifetime to make sure people understood that, how insensitive and, disgusting it was. And he made that comment. And Ann said just that. She just said, I'm disappointed that he doesn't understand that rape is really an abuse of power, and that's a crime, and you don't joke about it. And so that was an opportunity. And then a series of other things happened, including him refusing to shake her hand at a Dallas Chamber of Commerce event at the Los Angeles Hotel, which was just a major gaffe. He was mad at her about she was accusing him of some illegal doings to a company he owned. It was term life insurance, and it sort of got under his skin. And he said, I don't want to shake her hand. And he said it in front of 5 TV cameras and refused to shake her hand. She was like, oh, Clayton, I'm sorry to hear that. And that part of my job was that night to make sure that every TV station in Texas knew how to get that video, because it was pretty damaging. And then, shaking hand, and then just other unfortunate things that the candidate said. And, it happens on both sides. You go on the record saying something that's not very smart, and it gets repeated, and as it should. It's nothing but the truth, frankly. That's the way I think campaigns should run today. I don't see it happening as much, that more and more things just sort of get made up and are not truthful. But that's a whole other discussion. I think we should figure out a way to clean up our truth in advertising when it comes to political campaigns. But that's really not going to happen unless we have the fairness doctrine back. But that's for another day.
So in terms of, you mentioned the appointment power and how she used that to great effect. I remember Governor Hobby said to me more than once, he just told me, everybody thinks the lieutenant governor's has a lot of power. He said, and he mentioned the appointment power of the governor. He said, that's not small. So, but in terms of her legislative accomplishments, what are the top 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would say they stand the test of time?
Well, I think, as someone who was herself a recovering alcoholic, and who was always willing to counsel anybody else who was struggling with addiction, she got that more than anything. And with the help of Pat Cole and Dorothy Brown, her staff, they pushed for prison reform, establishing the first substance abuse program among TDC inmates. And it did reduce recidivism. There was records showing that was huge. Ethics reform, something that every single state government employee went through ethics reform training, understood what it meant. Barbara Jordan was the leader on that, establishing the program for that. I could go back to thinking of nursing home standards. She was horrified at some of the nursing home standards across the state, and she conducted what we call midnight visits of nursing homes. Particularly, there was some in Houston that we visited, and she pushed through legislation to improve the standards of nursing homes. A lot of it was also, Ann was good for Texas business, and she really believed that because of her unique stature as a woman who, in a rare situation, she could get leaders of economic development in a room and hold a meeting, and she did, and she created an economic policy that created and attracted new business to Texas. And even in the economic downturn, our state's economy grew by 2%. Now, whether or not everybody knew that, it was hard to put that on the list of accomplishments. I think that was frustrating for her. It's like people just didn't see her as somebody who's building the economy, but she was a great thing for the Texas economy just because of who she was as a personality and as someone who worked hard to attract new business to Texas. So I'd say those are some of her key ones that folks should remember about her legislative accomplishments.
All right. So what's next for the Ann Richards Legacy Project?
Well, like I say, we're still doing more of the book tour, and if I could wave my magic wand, I'd like to do another print run of the book and get it in as many Texas public schools as possible. That's going to take some fundraising, either public schools or public libraries or both, because like I say, it's a great primer on who Governor Richards was. It's a great way to learn about who she was. And then I also want to see this a public tribute to her in Austin. So when folks come from around the world, they can learn more about who she was and see her dynamic personality using, like I say, digital technology. And Austin, of course, being the hub of so much tech industry, I think we could figure that out pretty quickly and find a good location for it and a nice tribute to her, in addition to the school, which is doing so many great things. So those are the things I'm working on. And, I've had this little interruption with this cancer that I'm enduring right now, but it's interesting. It's probably made me even focus even more on getting it done and working hard on that on the days that I feel good. I'm in the middle of some chemotherapy, and I'll be wrapping up that at the end of April. But
is that the last set of treatments you have to have?
Well, no, there'll be more. Unfortunately, there'll be probably radiation and some surgery, and then we do some more infusions throughout the year. But doctors are hopeful that I've got a good team assembled, and we're working on a cure. And it's breast cancer, and that's nobody gets a pass. You can sit around and complain, but then you can say, look, use it as a motivation, and don't pass up a something, challenge to make you even more motivated to get something done. So that's where I am on that.
All right. Well, thoughts are with you on that.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate you. I really do.
Some audience questions.
Oh, good.
So one audience member asks, what advice do you have for students in the next generation of leaders eager to make a difference in their communities?
I think look at what Ann did. First, go back and look at her timeline. Think about what she was, which was a great communicator. I mean, you have a whole bunch of great ideas to get things done, but she was the early. She learned how to speak publicly through debate, being involved in debate as a high school kid, and then use that to your advantage and volunteer for local either campaigns or opportunities for public service. Get involved, going door to door for canvassing. Now that we're back at doing that post-pandemic, find issues that motivate you, whether it be anything from gun violence to the right to bodily autonomy, to doing what we can to curb climate change. All those things that young folks, I think I hear more and more from them that those are things they care about. But don't just give a lip service, get involved at any level you can. And then if you're interested in public service, pursue through higher education, such as going and applying to places like the Hobby School of Public Affairs and learn how to be an effective leader and communicator, because those are the the tools are there. Just take advantage of them.
So another question related to what you've answered is, and I think we can even put a fine point on this. If you want to get plugged into Texas politics and political campaigns, I think you suggested internships and volunteering are the way to go. Is that correct?
Yes, always. Yeah, look for internships, paid or non-paid. Sometimes it's impossible to, economically you can't do a non-paid, but they're out there too. And they're usually, for a summer or a couple of months while you're in school. Internships are invaluable because they give you a peek at the reality of a political campaign or a nonprofit that's influencing legislation or creating legislation to further a cause. And so absolutely internships, Google it, look around, ask your professors, ask your high school teachers, how do you find a good internship, and, do the research and find out about it. That's an excellent opportunity for young people.
Okay. So, and you've already commented on this, but I'd like to, as we wrap up, a couple more things. One is, one person's asked, what are some of the public policy decisions that Governor Richards made that are still with us today? That's part of the legacy. And I think you mentioned it was nursing homes, prison reform, dealing with addiction. Are there other things you think of that are out there that are still with us today?
That's a good question. I think ethics reform was something that she pushed through. The Texas Ethics Commission still holds a pretty high standard that Ann set. So I really am proud of that. Unfortunately, I think the prison, I should know this, but the prison reform program, I believe, was pretty much dismantled by the Bush administration. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how much of that is being instituted today. I think, like I say, it's been so long since a Democratic administration has been in office. A lot of those things have been dismantled. I think, she had a strong record of economic policy and pushing for Texas grown products through our agriculture system and through, commerce, Texas Department of Commerce. Those programs that she probably instituted, or there may be some semblance of those programs left, but it has been, 32 years, so things have changed. And I do not know about, I stand to be corrected on inclusion of her diverse appointments, but I'm pretty certain that we've not seen the record that she set in 32 years ago. But I think what the standard was that she had was pretty extreme in terms of getting things done, and she pushed the envelope. And she wasn't maybe people will say part of her problem was you broke the first rule in politics, get reelected. And that's a tough one if you're going to try to push through a bunch of reforms your first term. But she felt so strongly about so many of them, and including gun violence. And her hometown was Waco, as you know, or a tiny town outside of Waco called Lacey Lakeview. And one of the horrible tragedies back then was unfortunately a massacre at the Luby's cafeteria in Waco. And I think she really felt that her folks were still very much alive and went to that Luby's. And I think she just couldn't believe that could happen in her hometown. And that was a big factor in her vetoing the concealed carry law. And that was, I think, Jerry Patterson had introduced that bill. And it came back, she vetoed it. She had support across the state from law enforcement, but it ended up passing eventually. And of course, George W. Bush used that as long, to campaign against her in the 94 race, which, by the way, I didn't work on the 94 race. I had a brand new baby. And so I was home during that race. And so I was with everybody in spirit, but I was not home. I was at home with a baby during that campaign. A lot of people say that Anne, if you look at the numbers, she actually won more votes in that 94 race than she did in the 90 race. George W. just obviously won quite a few more. But there was a lot of interest in just getting her reelected. But some folks say that her heart wasn't in it, and maybe she was frustrated of constantly having to explain her accomplishments, and she just wanted to focus on public policy. And that's part of the problem with campaigns and reelections. Like, oh, here we go, we're already talking about running for president again, and we have so much more policy to get done, and it's a distraction. So you got to wonder about that system that we have. That, and of course, I still think today we have to do something about gerrymandering and how we do select our districts. And it's really horrifying that politicians get to pick their voters through gerrymandering instead of the other way around. It's really not the way our democracy was set up. So,
right. So to wrap this up, we've talked about a very accomplished woman, but all this has been done by a woman that's also very accomplished. So looking back retrospectively on your own life, did you ever imagine that this would be your career and you'd have the impact you've had? And what were the things about you that allowed you to bust through all these doors to do what you've done?
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you, by the way. That's very complimentary. I feel like I'm sort of been a, right time, right place. And as a bystander, I think I think it helps to, be inspired by strong leaders, men and women. My mother was a strong woman. She was the first female night editor of the Daily Texan at the University of Texas. I'm very proud of that. She was back in 1946. She, back in those days, not many women went to college, to a public university. That they did, they typically studied home economics or teaching or nursing, and those are all great careers, but not too many of them went into journalism. And I kind of resisted thinking, oh, I can't do exactly what my mother did. I always think, what was that about? But then I'm doing that, so, which was the journalism. I probably enjoyed too many things, history, English, whatever. I couldn't, art history, I just loved everything. So journalism just made sense, but also just a sense of curiosity. I think that's what I want to see young people have today, a sense of curiosity on how you can leave the planet a better place once you're gone. What are the things that you can do as an individual, as a citizen, to give back? And I think that's sort of how I've really led my life and tried to inspire young people to do that, including my own kids. I think with today's technology, it seems like we could be able to do it at a lot faster rate, but perhaps not. I think it's also the question of getting out and making eye contact with people, shaking hands, and listening, really listening to solve problems. I think those are the things that, like I say, people ask me, why do you get involved in politics? Because it's just impossible, but that's not true. I mean, you think about the things that we have been able to accomplish through public policy, and particularly through reaching across party lines. And, that's what Governor Hobby believed, and that's what he practiced. And that's what you teach there at the university, I believe. And I think that's what we need to see more of on a regular basis, going forward with education and through public policy.
One of the things we do here with our students, they have obviously ingrained opinions, and we're talking about 18 to 25-year-olds typically, and there's room for growth, obviously. Not an insult to you guys out there, my students, I'm just saying. But one of the questions I always raise with them, and this is something Governor Hobby once said to me, he said, suppose you're wrong.
Yeah.
How are you going to test for it? And I think it's a wake-up call about people and their opinions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Test for it. Get the data points, as Governor Hobby would say. Yeah. Look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. Yeah. And that's really important, to utilize statistics and the numbers don't lie. When it comes to politics, when it comes to running campaigns, when it comes to public policy, realize those. So,
well, Margaret, Justus, thank you for a great conversation, for being our guest today. To our audience, we're grateful for you tuning in to another episode of the Hobby Hour, and stay tuned for more details on next month's show on our website and social media platforms. And again, Margaret, what a pleasure. It's great seeing you, and take good care.
I will. And thank you, Dean. I'm so proud of you and all the folks there at the hobby school. You guys are doing great things. Keep up the good work, and hope to see you guys soon.
All right. Take care.